January 27th, 1944. Stokes Bay, the Solent, England. The water is a churning, slate-grey beast, whipped into whitecaps by a freezing winter wind. From the shingle beach, the English Channel looks less like a highway to liberation and more like a graveyard, but the cluster of high-ranking officers standing on the shoreline, collars turned up against the gale, aren't looking at the horizon. They are staring, with a mixture of horror and fascination, at a 30-ton monster attempting to defy the laws of physics. A Sherman tank, the workhorse of the American and British armoured divisions, is inching down the concrete ramp. But it looks wrong, grotesquely wrong. It is encircled by a dull, olive-drab canvas screen, erected like the walls of a collapsible bathtub, completely hiding the turret and the hull. It looks less like a weapon of war and more like a bloated canvas tent sliding into the sea. Standing apart from the brass is a man in a civilian coat, his eyes narrowed behind spectacles. This is Nicholas Straussler, the Hungarian-born engineer who has staked his reputation on a concept that most sane men call suicide. He watches as the tracks of the Sherman M4 hit the water. Clank, splash, grind. The tank pushes deeper. The water rises past the tracks, past the fenders, past the hull machine gun. By all logic, the water should be flooding the engine intakes right now. The 33-ton vehicle should be plummeting to the seabed, becoming an iron tomb for the 5 men sealed inside. But it doesn't. As the tracks lose purchase on the slipway, a strange guttural roar changes pitch. The tank's engine engages a rear propeller. The canvas screen, held taut by compressed air pillars and locked steel struts, displaces enough water to counter the immense weight of the steel. The Sherman bobs. It lurches. And then, impossibly, it begins to chug forward, floating with only inches of freeboard separating the crew from the freezing Atlantic. This is the duplex drive tank, nicknamed the DD. But the crews who have to operate them have a different name for it, the Donald Duck, or, in darker moments, the Iron Coffin. To understand why this terrifying machine exists, you have to go back to the disastrous raid on Dieppe in 1942. That raid taught the Allies a lesson written in blood. You cannot take a fortified port with infantry alone. If you land men on a beach without heavy fire support, they will be cut to ribbons by machine guns and artillery before they can cross the sand. They needed tanks. But not just tanks landed from barges an hour later. They needed tanks in the first wave. They needed armour that could swim ashore alongside the infantry, drop their screens and immediately engage German bunkers. Straussler, a brilliant automotive engineer, had proposed a solution that relied on the principle of displacement. It was simple Archimedes physics. If you increase the volume of the object without significantly increasing its weight, it will float. By welding a watertight platform around the hull and erecting a waterproof canvas screen, Straussler calculated he could create enough displacement to keep a Sherman afloat. But calculations on paper are one thing. Reality is another. Back at Stokes Bay, the wind picks up. The generals, including the formidable General Dwight D. Eisenhower and the eccentric British Major General Percy Hobart, watch through binoculars. Hobart is the commander of the 79th Armoured Division, a unit entirely dedicated to strange, modified tanks known as Hobart's Funnies. He is a believer. He knows that without these swimming tanks, the invasion of Europe is doomed to stall on the water's edge. Inside the floating Sherman, the sensory experience is claustrophobic hell. The commander stands in the turret, his head just peeking over the rim of the canvas screen. He is the only one who can see. Below him, the driver is blind, staring at the instrument panel, steering not by the tracks, but by a tiller that controls 2 small propellers at the rear. The loader and gunner are sitting in the dark, listening to the slap of waves against the thin canvas. That canvas is the only thing keeping them alive. It is essentially a rubberized cotton wall. If a wave hits it too hard, the struts could buckle. If a piece of shrapnel tears it, the displacement is lost and the tank sinks in seconds. "Keep her steady," the commander's voice crackles over the intercom, tight with tension. "Correcting to port, 2 degrees. The Sherman wallows in the swell. It creates a massive target, a slow-moving square blob on the water, travelling at a maximum speed of just 4 knots. To a German anti-tank gunner, It would look like a barn door sitting on the ocean. But Straussler's gamble is that the low profile of the tank in the water, combined with the element of surprise, will protect them. The Germans don't believe tanks can swim. They won't be looking for armour until the landing craft drop their ramps. On the shore, the scepticism is palpable. One American colonel is heard muttering that a heavy sea would swamp these things in minutes. And he's not wrong. The DD Sherman is designed for waves up to 1 foot high, maybe 2. The English Channel is notorious for swells of 4, 5 or 6 feet. Straussler watches the tank complete a turn. The propellers churn the grey water. The transition is the most dangerous part, where the tank stops swimming and the tracks bite into the sand. If they hit a sandbar or a runnel, the tank can belly out, leaving it stranded in the surf, a sitting duck. The tank approaches the shore. The roar of the engine deepens as the driver disengages the propellers and shifts power back to the tracks. Thud. Iron meets earth. The tank lurches up the shingle, water streaming off its flanks. As it clears the waterline, the commander pulls a lever. Compressed air is released. The canvas screen collapses instantly, folding down like a dropped skirt. Suddenly, it is no longer a canvas blob. It is a 75mm gun-toting M4 Sherman, instantly ready for combat. The turret rotates. The main gun elevates. General Hobart turns to Eisenhower. "Well, Ike?" Eisenhower lowers his binoculars. He sees the potential, but he also sees the risk. If the weather holds, these machines could win the war. If the weather turns, he will be sending thousands of men to drown inside steel tombs before they ever fire a shot. The decision is made. The 79th Armoured Division, along with American tank battalions, will adopt the DD. They have 5 months to train. 5 months to teach tank crews, men used to solid ground and heavy armour, how to navigate the open ocean in a vehicle that leaks, groans, and relies on a piece of fabric to keep out the Atlantic. Straussler exhales. His invention works. But the physics of a test bay are kind. The chaos of D-Day will show no such mercy. April 12, 1944. Fritton Lake, Norfolk, England. The water here is calm, deceptively calm. Surrounded by ancient trees and the chirping of birds, Fritton Lake looks like a postcard of rural English tranquility. But beneath the surface, the mud is being churned by the tracks of monsters. This is the secret classroom for the impending invasion. The men of the American 741st and 743rd Tank Battalions, along with the British Sherwood Rangers Yeomanry, have been brought here to learn a skill that shouldn't exist: how to sail a 33-ton tank. Sergeant Jim Eichner, a communications expert with the 741st, stands by the lakeside, watching a Sherman float past. It looks ridiculous, a steel beast wrapped in a canvas skirt, bobbing like a cork. But nobody is laughing. They've all seen the manuals. They've all heard the whispers. If the screen tears, you have roughly 40 seconds before she hits the bottom. The training begins not in the tanks, but in a swimming pool. The instructors introduce the men to the ATEA, the Amphibious Tank Escape Apparatus. It's a primitive rebreather, a rubber bag strapped to the chest with a mouthpiece and a nose clip. It looks like a toy, but it's the only thing standing between them and a watery grave. The instructions are terrifyingly counterintuitive. If the tank goes down, the instructor barks, pacing the poolside, do not try to open the hatch immediately. The water pressure will jam it shut. You have to wait. Wait. The word hangs in the damp air. You sit in your seat. You put on your ATEA. You wait for the water to rise past your ankles, past your waist, past your neck. You wait until the water fills the turret completely. Only then, when the pressure equalizes, do you push the hatch open and swim for the surface. For a tanker, trained to fear fire above all else, the idea of sitting calmly in a sinking steel box while freezing water rises around their throat is the stuff of nightmares. Out on the lake, the reality of operating the DD is becoming clear. Inside the hull, the driver, Private First Class Don Anderson, is fighting a losing battle against sensory deprivation. The moment the canvas screen goes up, his world disappears. He can't see the water. He can't see the shore. He can't even see the commander standing 5 feet above him. His only connection to the outside world is a small, rubber-speaking tube and the ship's compass mounted near his knee. "Starboard, Anderson! Hard to starboard!" the commander's voice yells through the din of the engine. Anderson yanks the tiller. The tank responds sluggishly. In the water, the Sherman doesn't turn. It drifts. The twin propellers at the rear are powered by the main engine, but they are fighting against the immense drag of the square hull. It feels less like driving a vehicle and more like herding a drunken elephant. The freeboard, the distance between the water level and the top of the canvas screen, is just 9 inches. 9 inches. A sudden gust of wind catches the screen. The tank lifts heavily to the left. Water slops over the rim, splashing onto the engine deck. The bilge pumps rattle into life, frantically spitting water back out. If the pumps fail, the engine floods. If the engine floods, the propellers stop. If the propellers stop, the tank turns broadside to the waves and rolls over. It is a delicate, terrifying ballet. The crews learn to spot the green water, the solid, heavy waves that can crush the screen struts, versus the white water of the chop. They learn to perform maintenance on the rubberized canvas, patching holes with bicycle repair kits, treating the waterproofing grease like holy oil. But Fritton Lake is not the English Channel. Here there is no swell. There are no German 88mm guns zeroing in on them. As May approaches, the training moves to the coast, Studland Bay. Here the ocean shows its teeth. During Exercise Smash, a rehearsal for the landings, the sea turns rough. Several British Valentine tanks, the precursors to the Sherman DDs, launch into the chop. The waves are too high. One by one, the screens buckle. The water pours in, the tanks vanish. 6 men drown. The news ripples through the barracks like a cold wind. The brass chalks it up to acceptable losses during training. The men of the 741st and 743rd see it differently. They are being asked to ride coffins into a hurricane. General Eisenhower inspects the units one last time. He sees the strain in their faces. He knows the gamble. The DD tanks are the ace up his sleeve. If they make it to the beach, they will provide the infantry with immediate heavy fire support, blasting the bunkers that the naval guns might miss. Without them, the first wave of infantry is naked. On June 1st, the order comes down. The tanks are loaded onto LCTs, landing craft to tank. The screens are checked one last time. The struts are locked. The waterproofing grease is applied thick. The men write their last letters home. They pack their ATEA gear, checking the rubber hoses for cracks. They are as ready as they will ever be. The weather reports are coming in from the Atlantic. A massive storm is brewing. The channel is churning, and thousands of miles away, the order is given. Go. The impossible tanks are going to war. June 6th, 1944. 05:35 hours. 5,000 yards off Omaha Beach. The English Channel is angry. The dawn light reveals a seascape of heaving grey mountains, swells rising 6 feet, crashing over the bows of the landing craft tank, LCTs. Inside the steel bellies of the landing craft, the crews of the 741st Tank Battalion are sick. They are cold, wet and terrified. The order comes over the radio. Launch. On the bridge of the lead LCT, the skipper looks at the waves. The manual for the duplex drive Sherman is clear. Maximum safe wave height, 1 foot. The waves out here are 4, maybe 5 times that limit. To launch now is suicide, but the infantry is scheduled to hit the beach at H hour, and they need armour. The invasion plan is a clockwork mechanism. One delay jams the gears. The ramp drops. The sea rushes in, swirling around the tracks of the lead Sherman. Driver, advance. The first tank, commanded by Sergeant Geddes, clatters down the wet steel ramp. It hangs for a moment on the lip, a 33-ton pendulum, before plunging into the abyss. Splash. The tank disappears in a cloud of spray. For a heart-stopping second, it's gone. Then the canvas screen breaks the surface. It's floating. But immediately, the ocean attacks. The waves aren't just high, they are chaotic. The current is ripping sideways at a brutal 3 knots. The DD tanks are designed to face the waves head-on, their bow screens cutting the water. But to reach their designated sector on Omaha Beach, the tanks have to turn. As they turn, they expose their flanks. The first wave hits the canvas side of a tank in the second column. The strut snaps with the sound of a pistol shot. The canvas collapses inward. Thousands of gallons of Atlantic water pour onto the engine deck. Inside, the driver screams as cold water hits his back. The engine sputters and dies. The tank loses forward momentum and becomes a dead weight. "Bail out! Bail out!" The commander scrambles up through the turret ring. The loader tries to follow, but the water pressure is already sealing the hatches. The tank tilts back, nose pointing at the sky, and slides beneath the waves. It takes less than 10 seconds for 33 tons to vanish. This scene repeats again and again. Of the 32 DD tanks launched by the 741st Tank Battalion at Omaha, 27 sink. It is a massacre of machinery. Men in life jackets, if they got out in time, are left bobbing in the freezing swell, watching their unsinkable tanks plummet to the seabed. They are now infantrymen without rifles, sailors without a ship, drifting toward a beach that is erupting in German machine gun fire. But not everyone fails. Further down the line, opposite the sector marked Dog Green, the skipper of an LCT carrying tanks from the 743rd Tank Battalion sees the disaster unfolding. He sees the 741st drowning. He grabs the radio. "To hell with this," he shouts over the roar of the wind. "We're taking them in." He overrides the launch order. Instead of dropping the ramp miles out, he rams his LCT through the surf, driving it straight onto the sandbar. The ramp crashes down into the shallows. The 743rd Shermans roar off the deck, their screens already down, their guns traversing. They are dry, they are alive, and they are angry. Meanwhile, on Sword Beach, the British 13th/18th Hussars are having a different war. Their launch point was moved closer, 3,000 yards out. The waves are still rough, but the current is kinder. Here the impossible works. Inside the lead tank on Sword, the commander is fighting the tiller with both hands. He is drenched. He is shouting corrections to his driver every 5 seconds. "Port, steer port, watch that swell." A massive wave crashes over the screen. The bilge pumps scream, sucking water from the floor of the hull and spitting it back out. The water level inside rises to the driver's ankles. He keeps his foot on the gas. If he lifts, they sink. They are closer now. The beach is a line of smoke and fire. Mortar shells are splashing in the water around them, sending geysers of spray into the air. A piece of shrapnel tears a hole in the canvas screen of the tank to their right. The crew reacts instantly, stuffing a uniform jacket into the tear, holding it in place with brute force. Touchdown in 30 seconds. The commander watches the depth gauge. The tracks are still spinning in water. The propellers are churning. Suddenly a jolt. Grind. The tracks bite into the sand. The tank lurches forward, lifting out of the sway of the ocean. The engine note changes from a labouring drone to a throaty roar. "Drop screens! Drop screens!" The commander pulls the release lever. The compressed air hisses. The canvas skirt collapses, revealing the olive-drab steel armour beneath. To the German defenders in the bunkers overlooking Sword Beach, it looks like a hallucination. One moment, the sea is empty. The next, tanks are rising from the waves like mythological beasts, their 75mm guns already levelling at the pillboxes. The impossible has arrived. Now, the fight begins. June 6th, 1944. 7:40 hours. Sword Beach, Sector WWII. The instant the tracks bite into the wet sand, the sensory world inside the tank changes violently. The sickening sway of the ocean vanishes, replaced by the brutal, bone-rattling vibration of 30 tons of steel crushing shingle. "Screen down. Driver, hard left. Traverse right." The commander yanks the release lever. With a pneumatic hiss, the canvas walls, the only thing that kept them alive for the last hour, collapse. The boat is gone. The tank is born. To the infantry of the British 3rd Division, pinned down by machine gun fire from the dunes, the arrival of the DD tanks is nothing short of a miracle. They expected to be fighting alone for the first hour. Instead, they look up to see Shermans rising from the surf like prehistoric beasts, water streaming off their hulls, their 75mm guns already traversing toward the concrete bunkers. Boom! The lead tank fires. A high-explosive shell slams into a German pillbox, silencing a customised MG-42 that had been tearing up the beach. The infantry cheers, a ragged, desperate sound over the din of battle. On Utah Beach, the American 71st Tank Battalion has a similar story. Despite losing 4 tanks to the sea, when a landing craft hit a mine, the remaining 28 DD tanks launch 3,000 yards out. The current sweeps them south, but they make it. They crawl out of the surf just ahead of the first wave of infantry. A German artillery officer, observing from a bunker on the bluffs, lowers his binoculars in disbelief. He shouts into his field telephone, "Schwimmpanzer! Sie haben Schwimmpanzer!" Swimming tanks. They have swimming tanks. The panic in his voice is real. The Wehrmacht's defence doctrine relied on the assumption that Allied armour would be delayed, stuck on landing craft, vulnerable. They never planned for tanks to simply drive out of the ocean and start shooting. But the triumph at Utah, Sword, Gold and Juno only highlights the tragedy at Omaha. At Omaha Beach, where the 741st launched too far out and 27 tanks sank, the infantry paid the price. Without immediate armoured support, the men of the 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions were slaughtered in the surf. They had no cover. They had no way to suppress the bunkers. It took hours of bloody, close-quarters fighting to achieve what the tanks at Utah accomplished in minutes. The contrast is stark. Where the DD tanks failed, the beach became a slaughterhouse. Where they succeeded, the Atlantic Wall cracked open. In the days following D-Day, the surviving crews of the 741st and 743rd inspect their machines. The canvas screens are tattered, ripped by shrapnel and torn by the sea. The struts are bent. But the tanks are operational. They push inland, fighting through the hedgerows of Normandy, leaving the ocean behind. Back in England, Nicholas Straussler receives the reports. He reads about the sinkings at Omaha with a heavy heart. He knows that the decision to launch into 6-foot swells at 5,000 yards was a command error, not a design flaw. But he also reads about the successes. He reads about the hundreds of infantrymen who are alive today because a floating tank took out a machine gun nest in the first 5 minutes of the invasion. The Donald Duck tanks, the Iron Coffins, the laughingstock of the armoured divisions, had done the impossible. They had bridged the gap between the sea and the shore. Today, if you dive off the coast of Normandy, you can still find them. The sunken Shermans of the 741st sit upright on the seabed, ghostly reminders of the gamble. Their canvas screens have long since rotted away, revealing the steel skeletons beneath. They are war graves now, tombs for the brave crews who followed orders into the abyss. But for the men who made it to the beach, the DD tank was not a coffin. It was a chariot. It was the strange, ugly, impossible machine that broke the Atlantic Wall. And as the sun sets on June 6, 1944, with the beachhead secure and the liberation of Europe underway, one thing is certain. The skeptics were wrong. You can make a tank swim. You just have to be brave enough to get in.